When you think of the glamorous life of a princess, you imagine tiaras and castles, royal privilege and fairy tale romance. And for Princess Margaret Rose, sister to Queen Elizabeth II, the gilded reality included all of these, yet her story reveals the invisible chains that come with royal blood. In the post-war years, as Britain struggled to rebuild from the ashes of conflict, a princess fell for a divorced war hero, a man whose military medals gleamed on the same royal uniform that marked him as forbidden. Their story would captivate a nation, divide public opinion, and force a young woman to choose between the crown and her heart, as we describe Margaret of the United Kingdom, the princess who loved a married man. The gentle Scottish breeze swept across Glamis Castle on the 29th of August, 1930, carrying with it the first cries of Princess Margaret Rose, daughter of the Duke and Duchess of York. Born into privilege but not destined for the throne, Margaret entered a world where duty would eternally shadow desire. The registration of her birth was deliberately delayed, a small manipulation of fate to avoid her being numbered 13 in the parish register. It was perhaps the first of many instances where Margaret's life would be arranged to suit others. Margot, as she was affectionately known within the royal family, grew up in the warm embrace of what the public perceived as an ideal family unit. Between the family's London residence at 145 Piccadilly and the Royal Lodge in Windsor, Margaret's childhood unfolded in gilded rooms and manicured gardens. Her father would later fondly describe Elizabeth as his pride and Margaret as his joy, a distinction that subtly defined the sisters' roles from an early age. Under the watchful eye of their Scottish governess Marion Crawford, Margaret and Elizabeth received an education that emphasised etiquette and arts over academic rigour. Margaret's spirit gravitated naturally toward music, her fingers finding the piano keys at just 4 years old. While Elizabeth embodied quiet dignity, Margaret blazed with an extroverted charm that would later captivate many, perhaps too many. The abdication crisis of 1936 thrust Margaret's father reluctantly onto the throne as King George VI, repositioning Margaret as second in line. As the family moved into Buckingham Palace, 11-year-old Margaret adjusted to the weight of increased royal expectations. When World War II cast its shadow over Britain, Margaret and Elizabeth remained at Windsor Castle despite suggestions to evacuate them to Canada. There, amid the tension of war, they staged Christmas pantomimes to support the Queen's Wool Fund and addressed evacuated children over BBC radio. "Good night, children," Margaret concluded in her first public broadcast, her voice already carrying the confidence that would become her hallmark. On the other side of the world, a different story was unfolding. Peter Wooldridge Townshend, born in 1914 in Rangoon, Burma, was forging his path through rigid military tradition. The son of an Indian Army lieutenant colonel, young Peter was sent to England at 8 for his education, attending boarding schools that moulded boys into men of service. By September 1933, he had entered the Royal Air Force College Cranwell as a flight cadet, his excellence earning him recognition as a prize cadet. While Margaret performed in palace pantomimes, Townshend was flying into the flames of the Battle of Britain. On the 3rd of February 1940, he participated in downing a German Heinkel He-111 bomber, the first enemy aircraft to crash on English soil during the war. His gallantry earned him the Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Flying Cross, badges of honour that would later gleam on the uniform of a man stationed at the heart of the royal household. In 1944, as the war reached its crescendo, King George VI appointed Townshend as his equerry. The decorated group captain, married with 2 sons, entered royal service with impeccable credentials and unimpeachable character. His duty was to the king, to serve as a close personal attendant and advisor. Neither he nor the young Princess Margaret, then just 14, could have anticipated how their paths would intertwine. The palace walls, which had witnessed centuries of royal secrets, stood ready to absorb one more. The royal family and their devoted war hero were about to embark on a journey that would test the boundaries between duty and desire, between the sanctity of the crown and the sanctity of the heart. The year 1947 marked a pivotal moment in the lives of Princess Margaret and Group Captain Peter Townsend. During a 3-month royal tour of southern Africa, the princess, then 16, found herself spending considerable time with the 32-year-old equerry. As part of the royal entourage responsible for the family's well-being, Townsend accompanied the princess on various activities, including horseback riding. These outings provided opportunities for conversation away from the strict protocols of court life. "That's when I really fell in love with him," Margaret would later confess, a frank admission that revealed the genesis of feelings that would eventually captivate a nation. For the young princess, Townsend represented something beyond the pageantry of royal life, a connection to the broader world through a man who had served with distinction during Britain's darkest hours. Their return to Britain brought no immediate change to their formal relationship, yet subtle signs suggested a growing closeness. During a visit to Belfast in October 1947, Townsend reportedly requested that his room be moved next to Princess Margaret's at Hillsborough Castle. Though seemingly innocuous, such arrangements rarely occurred without purpose within the meticulously organised royal household. The daily operations of palace life placed Townsend and Margaret in frequent proximity. As equerry to King George VI, his responsibilities included attending state functions, managing royal engagements, and providing personal assistance to the royal family. These official duties created a structure within which their relationship could develop, shielded from excessive scrutiny by the very formality that governed their interactions. As Margaret matured into a young woman of notable beauty and charm, she attracted admirers from throughout British society. Yet amid the attention, her appreciation for Townsend's steady presence remained constant. Their connection, built on shared experiences and mutual respect, continued to deepen beneath the veneer of royal decorum. Townsend's personal life underwent significant change in 1952, when his 11-year marriage to Rosemary Pratt, Marchioness Camden, ended in divorce. While divorce rates had increased in post-war Britain, it remained a considerable social stigma, particularly in the conservative circles of the royal court. The dissolution of his marriage coincided with a momentous shift in the monarchy itself. On the 6th of February 1952, King George VI passed away, and Princess Elizabeth ascended the throne as Queen Elizabeth II. Margaret, while mourning her beloved father, also faced the reality that her sister now embodied the very institution whose traditions stood as barriers to her personal happiness. The new Queen appointed Townsend as comptroller of her mother's household, maintaining his position within the royal establishment despite his changed marital status. This appointment ensured continued proximity between Margaret and Townsend. Whether the Queen recognised the nature of their relationship remains unclear from historical records. What is evident is that both the princess and the group captain continued to fulfil their respective duties with the public composure expected of their positions, whatever private feelings they may have harboured. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II approached in June 1953, promising a spectacle of pageantry and tradition that would reaffirm the monarchy's central place in British life. For Princess Margaret, standing in her sister's shadow at Westminster Abbey, the ceremony would hold significance beyond the crowning of a new sovereign. The public eye, focused primarily on the young Queen, would soon turn its unrelenting gaze toward the princess and her unlikely attachment to a divorced war hero. As the coronation preparations intensified, neither Margaret nor Townsend could have anticipated how a single spontaneous gesture, witnessed amid the splendour of the ceremony, would thrust their private affection into the harsh light of public scrutiny. Westminster Abbey resonated with centuries of tradition on the 2nd of June 1953, as Elizabeth II received the crown of England. Amid the pageantry and splendour, a moment of startling intimacy unfolded. Princess Margaret, elegant in her coronation finery, reached out to brush a piece of lint from Group Captain Townsend's uniform. Her fingers lingered perhaps a fraction too long. Her expression softened imperceptibly. This fleeting gesture, witnessed by sharp-eyed observers and keen journalists, would ignite a scandal that rocked the monarchy. For years, Margaret and Townsend had maintained the delicate facade of formal royal relations. They had perfected the art of existing in parallel, present in the same rooms, participating in the same events, but never crossing the invisible line that separated duty from desire. That single brush of her hand against his jacket shattered the illusion. The private affection between a princess and a divorcee had suddenly become public property. The People newspaper, on the 14th of June 1953, ran a front-page article with a headline that throbbed with urgency: "They must deny it now." The subterfuge had ended. What had been whispered in palace corridors was now being shouted from newsstands across Britain. The nation awakened to the realization that the vivacious younger sister of the Queen harboured deep feelings for a man whom tradition, church, and law deemed unsuitable. Behind closed doors, the palace machinery sprang into action. Winston Churchill, once again serving as Prime Minister, conferred with the Queen and her advisers. The Church of England, of which the monarch was supreme governor, stood firm in its opposition to divorce. Commonwealth leaders expressed concern about the potential constitutional crisis. The weight of an empire seemed to balance precariously on the slender shoulders of a 22-year-old princess and her forbidden love. In July 1953, barely a month after the coronation and the revelation of their relationship, Townsend received new orders. He was to serve as air attaché at the British Embassy in Brussels, a prestigious posting that conveniently removed him from Margaret's immediate circle. The physical separation was presented as a routine diplomatic assignment, but few were fooled by the transparent attempt to douse the flames of scandal. For Margaret, Townsend's departure created a void that no royal engagement or public duty could fill. They maintained contact through letters, careful, measured communications that could withstand scrutiny if intercepted. Both understood the magnitude of the forces aligned against them, not just the government or the church, but the very concept of royal duty that had been instilled in Margaret since birth. The British public, meanwhile, found themselves divided. Many sympathised with the young princess, seeing in her struggle the universal conflict between heart and responsibility. Others stood firm with tradition, believing that royal privilege came with commensurate obligation. The media oscillated between romantic speculation and moral condemnation, keeping the story alive even as the protagonists remained separated by the English Channel. As 1953 gave way to 1954, Margaret maintained a punishing schedule of royal engagements, her public smile masking private turmoil. She attended state dinners, opened hospitals, and represented the Crown at various functions, all while the question of her relationship with Townsend hung in the air, unresolved and increasingly urgent. The Royal Marriages Act of 1772 stipulated that members of the royal family under the age of 25 required the sovereign's consent to marry. This legal hurdle would expire on Margaret's 25th birthday, the 22nd of August, 1955. As that date approached, speculation mounted. Would the princess wait until she could legally marry without her sister's approval? Would the Queen, caught between sisterly affection and sovereign duty, find a way to support Margaret's happiness without compromising the crown? Townsend returned to England periodically, each visit carefully managed to minimise public exposure, while allowing the couple brief, precious moments together. These interludes, stolen from the relentless march of duty, only strengthened their resolve. Yet with each passing month the obstacles seemed to multiply rather than diminish. As summer yielded to autumn in 1955, Princess Margaret approached a crossroads that would define not just her own future, but potentially alter the course of the monarchy. The world watched and waited for her decision, caught between romantic hope and pragmatic expectation. The choice before her was stark: pursue personal happiness at the potential cost of royal privilege, or sacrifice love on the altar of duty. And time, that most implacable of forces, was running out. Princess Margaret's 25th birthday on the 21st of August 1955 passed with celebration, but without the announcement many had anticipated. Under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772, she could now marry without the Queen's consent. Yet the silence from the palace spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, complex negotiations continued regarding the princess's future. The reality was stark. Margaret could marry Townsend, but at tremendous cost. She would retain her title, but lose her royal privileges, income and place in the succession. Most painfully, she would need to leave Britain for at least 5 years, a separation from her sister and the only life she had known. In October 1955, Townsend returned to London for consultations at the Air Ministry, providing an opportunity for the couple to reunite at Clarence House. For weeks they weighed not just their feelings, but the practical implications of a life together outside the royal fold. The Archbishop of Canterbury counselled against the marriage, while Commonwealth representatives expressed concern about the monarchy's standing in their nations. On October 31, 1955, Margaret announced her decision through a statement from Clarence House. "I would like it to be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend." She acknowledged her conflicting loyalties and concluded, "I have reached this decision entirely alone, and in doing so I have been strengthened by the unfailing support and devotion of Group Captain Townsend." The wording was carefully crafted to protect both Townsend's honour and the dignity of the crown. That evening the princess appeared at a dinner engagement, her composure impeccable. Townsend, meanwhile, returned to Brussels without public comment, his duty to the crown continuing despite the personal cost. The years that followed saw Margaret and Townsend forge separate paths. The princess maintained her royal duties, opening hospitals, representing the Queen on Commonwealth tours, attending ceremonial events, with outward grace, though those close to her noted a new intensity to her famous love of nightlife. In 1959, Townsend married Marie-Luce Jamain, a Belgian woman 25 years his junior. They settled in France and had 3 children, Marie-Françoise, Pierre and Isabelle. Townsend reinvented himself as an author, his autobiography Time and Chance, respectfully navigating his royal connection. Margaret herself married photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones in 1960, the first royal wedding broadcast on television with an audience of 300 million worldwide. Queen Elizabeth II elevated Armstrong-Jones to nobility as the Earl of Snowdon. Their children, David and Sarah, arrived in 1961 and 1964, respectively. The marriage that began with such promise gradually unravelled. By 1976, the Snowdons had separated, and their divorce 2 years later marked the first in the immediate royal family since 1901. Margaret, who had once sacrificed personal happiness for royal propriety, now found herself a divorcee, the very status that had made Townsend unsuitable. The decades that followed brought health challenges for Margaret, including pneumonia in 1993 and multiple strokes that diminished her vitality. Townsend lived quietly in France until his death from stomach cancer on June 19, 1995. When Margaret herself died on February 9, 2002, at age 71, the eulogies painted a complex portrait of a woman caught between private desire and public obligation. The story of Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend endures not merely as royal history, but as a poignant reminder of the price sometimes exacted by position and responsibility. Their sacrifice, made under the social constraints of their era, continues to resonate in a world still struggling to reconcile duty with the fundamental human longing for personal fulfillment. And now I'd love to see you in the comments. Were you familiar with Princess Margaret's story? And what do you think of this story? I can't wait to hear from you, and thanks for joining me in another episode. Cheers until next time.